Yeah.
Okay, so it's full screen now. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is, I guess Henrik already said it, but my name is Davy Antebi. I am, since September of 2018, I serve as the Deputy Ambassador here in Denmark. I am currently at home in Israel. I came here for Pesach and also to get the vaccine finally. And also something very exciting that we are all going to pass, I guess, for the fourth time next week, which is the Israeli elections on the 23rd of March. Even though in the embassy we've already voted last week. So I was asked to speak about something which is very complicated, especially for people who don't come from Israel. I think that people even in Israel don't really understand fully what is going on and how come we have reached a situation that we are facing fourth election within 2 years. And even though we haven't even completed the fourth election, people are already speaking about the fifth election. So I'm going to try to make some order in it. And I want to take you also a little bit back in history and in time. I don't want to speak only about what currently happens today in Israel, because I think it sits on a lot of historical currents and events that one have to be aware of when talking about the Israeli political system. Now, if I speak too quickly, or if I speak in words you don't understand, you can raise your hand and ask a question, because I want you to understand that that's the whole point of this evening today. So you have here on brief just the different points we're going to touch, and let's just dive in. We're going to start with a brief history of Jewish politics. And for us to understand that, we first need of course, to go and see what is the definition of politics as a term, as a general definition. And politics is actually defined as the practice of influencing other people and the division of resources and power. So we all know that actually we cast our in the our note in our vote in the ballot every so and so years, and the whole idea is for us to delegate, to give the right for our representatives to actually decide how, first of all, the money is distributed in the political system in the country. How do we cut the cake, and who gets what? And also values, and that's the first part of influencing. So I said it's also an historical journey, but wait, something here jumped. So 1 second. Okay, never mind. It just can't. The screen is kind of stuck. I'm sorry. 1 second. Okay, never mind. Can you still see me? Yes. Okay. No, because I still do you see your face? So, going back in time, we all learned in school that the democracy is a political method that was invented in Greece. Also, the name demos, which is people in Greece, and kratos, which is rule, give us the source as it is in Greek. But we see already tendencies in the Jewish tradition, democratic traditions, even before the state of Israel. For example, in the Talmud, written some 1500 years ago, we have a quote here from the tractate of Yoma, which says that one does not appoint a community leader for the congregation unless one carries a box of insects, kupat shratzim in Hebrew, behind him. What does it mean? First of all, it means that throughout, you see here the picture from the synagogue and the centuries I'm talking about, the Jewish people the Jewish communities were based around the Jewish identity, and they were led by Rosh HaKahal, the head of the congregation. Such figure was always elected democratically. you didn't inherit the right to become the head of the community. You had to be voted upon it. And you can see that even here we have from the Talmud a saying that each one, what does it mean to carry a box of insects? It means every politician, every leader has some scandals in the closet of some sort. That's what it means here in a box of insects. And he should carry it with his hand, meaning it should be open. We should know about his advantages and disadvantages. Who is he married to? Who might he favor? Etc. etc. So these kind of tendencies of what we would call today maybe democratic values, we can see them already hinted in our tradition. And I brought here two more quotes. One doesn't, and that's what exactly what I just explained, one doesn't appoint a community leader unless one consults the community. That's also from the Talmud, from the tractate of Brachot. And we also see it in the Bible from Shemot, Achrei Rabim Le'atot, after the majority to rest. You take the decision after what the majority says. And then I jump, of course, to 1897, the first Zionist Congress in Basel in Switzerland. And we saw already there, and we are speaking more than 50 years before the foundation of the State of Israel, the sprouts, the seeds of democracy and the values that characterize Israel to this very day. I just can't see, sorry, just can't see ahead of the presentation, and I just can't see what it says. So allow me 1 second, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, now we're good. So one of the first terms that were agreed in that first Congress, of course, who are going to be its members, and how are we going to vote? Vote? How are we going to take decisions? We know, for example, that there was a very heated debate in one of those congresses, of those Zionist congresses, where should the Hebrew Zionist state be founded? Should it be in the historical homeland of the Jews, which is Israel? But there was also a discussion to maybe establish it in Uganda. So they had to establish a political system of taking decisions. And it was already decided right from the beginning that, first of all, it has to be equal, meaning one man, one vote. That's one. Also, it was very important for the founders of the Zionist Congress to be very inclusive. So they would have all the representations of all different groups and sects within the Jewish people represented and part of this initiative. So they would speak the voice of the Jewish people in its entirety. And that brought to, first of all, a very pluralistic system and a multi-party system, meaning you could find there different colors, different hues of very different political views, all the way from the ultra-Orthodox, which were also not the far ultra-Orthodox, but the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, were also present in the Congress on the one hand, and then you could find, of course, the secular, progressive leftists on the other side from the very beginning. And that's why the system was relative. I mean, it meant that we wanted to give everyone a representation, so we created a system that was composed of a lot of parties, very different ones, and we take a decision together. It's very important to understand that, because this, in many ways, predicts the way that the Israeli political system, it's the stone on which the Israeli political system was founded upon and still acts upon today in 2021, even though it's been more than 120 years afterwards. So that's just a very brief history, and you'll see how it connects to the next things I'm going to present now. And you can see here a very brief and short political identity card of Israel. The method that we use is parliamentary democracy. We have a parliament, we're a democracy. We're supposed to have elections every 4 years. We'll soon see what really happens. The number of the Knesset members is 120, just like the Sanhedrin, which was the High Court of Second Temple period, which also comprised of 120 sages, of Chachamim, rabbis. In this current government, we have 36 ministers. It hasn't always been this way. We're going to see it later on, how it changed and what happened. In the Supreme Court, we have 3 authorities, just like the scheme, in Denmark. We have 15 justices, 15 judges, and Israel doesn't really have a constitution. It actually practices an unwritten one, meaning we have what we call basic laws, fundamental laws, Chukei Yesod. And the whole idea was that there was a big debate when the state was established, whether we should have a constitution or not. The more religious factions, players in the system said, we already have a constitution, and that's the Torah. Of course, the secular Zionists did not accept that, especially in a modern state. So as a compromise, which is known as Harari Compromise, they decided that they will pass small passages with time. Every time they would pass another basic law and another basic law until we will have the full picture of all the basic laws that will together comprise of a constitution. So we don't have one significant moment like the British have of the Magna Carta, when all the nobles sat around and agreed upon the basic values of the state. In Israel, again, because we have an inclusive and multi-party system, they decided we are not going to just take a decision with the power of a very slim majority. We're going to do it gradually with those basic laws. Today, Israel has more than 10 basic laws already. Some of them refer to the government, the political system, the judiciary system, Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, Israel being as the Jewish state, and all those basic things you would expect to find in the constitution, etc., are already there. So we are getting to the end of enacting more laws that we need to have the full constitution. Now, I've mentioned that we have an extreme system, a multi-party system. I would say it's an extreme one. And I brought you here some figures in the table just to show you how over the years we have had those fluctuations. But one could see that basically from the very beginning, from 1949, when we held the first elections in Israel, we already had 15 parties. And today, currently in the Knesset, we also have 14. So we kind of have the same, but you can see that some things happened in the middle, and I've highlighted them here in those red boxes. You can see that in 77, which is a very crucial and historical year in Israel, because I'm going to do it really short, because all the way from 49 until 77, there was one party in power. And I think you have something similar in Sweden also, that the Social Democrats have been in power for a very long time, and the Labour Party is the Social Democratic Party. It's the equivalent, so it's center-left in Israel. And in many ways, all the institutions that were created before the establishment of the State of Israel were created by forces belonging to the Labour Party. And the Labour Party has been in power from 49 all the way till 77. That's a long time. And then they were the ones dealing with the wars for the survival of Israel when it was founded, the Independence War, but later on in the Six-Day War in 67, when the state was almost destroyed, and then on the Yom Kippur War in 73, which was again launched by surprise on the holiest day of the Jewish year. So they held all the waves of the immigrants, of the Olim, the newcomers coming to Israel, millions of them. In the beginning, the country was very poor. We had a crisis where Israel was also ostracized, and the Arab countries would not sell oil and petroleum to Israel. So we had energy deficiency, a lot of problems, a lot of challenges that the Labour Party actually was in power, handling them, and of course bringing their values to the way that Israel as a state was founded. And then in 77, something very big happened. For the first time, the Labour Party lost the power, and Menachem Begin, which is a very famous Israeli prime minister, was elected prime minister with the Likud, the big right-center party of Israel, which is in a way, you can equivalent it to Venstre in Denmark. But you can see that it was already the days right after the Yom Kippur War in '73. Golda Meir was the prime minister back then. And there was a lot of criticism about, against the government. The rule of Mapai, of the Labour Party, was crumbling down. And with this crumble, you can see that the number of parties have exploded to 17. And then in '84, which again, under the same influences, that was the peak of that process, where we reached 21 different parties. Where we have in parliament only 120 members. Even Denmark has more members. And Israel today has 9 million citizens. So just for you to grasp that. I will soon show you how it affected the system in many ways, because in the '90s, there was a very important revolution that was presented in Israel. Because of this high number of parties, it is very, very hard to form a coalition. And in Israel, 61 is the magic number, because 61 means that you have the majority out of 120. And it was very hard to get to that number when you have so many parties. It also meant the shrinking of the big parties. So you were dependent on many forces. And as a result, in the '90s, Israel presented something revolutionary and changed the way we vote in the elections. Actually, we created a system where every citizen that comes to vote votes with two notes, with two ballots. One vote goes for the party that you support, and the other one goes for the prime minister, the person you want to see at the head of the pyramid. And the whole idea behind it was they thought that this would bring stability, because then it would be a vote of confidence of the citizens towards which prime minister they want to see in power. But what actually happened in reality was just the opposite. Because until then, if I, for example, wanted to secure the rule of Likud, of Venstre in Israel, I would just vote Likud. Because all the other right-wing parties that are maybe more to the right, you couldn't know if they would go with them or not. Most probably they would. But if you really wanted Begin, for example, you had to vote Likud. In the '90s, this system enabled me to vote for, let's say, Moledet, which was back then a far-right party. And then with my other vote, I'm putting Benjamin Netanyahu, for example. So the party of the prime minister, the Likud, shrunk, because I wasn't anymore obliged to vote to that party. And that's why it didn't hold for long. I think we had only two election systems working like that, and we changed it back. And today, and that was one big crisis of our electoral system, trying to solve the problem of an extreme, inclusive, multi-party system on the one hand, but then also a coalition system that needs the 61 hands. And from the '70s, there was a crisis. Today, we're facing a different crisis, and I'll speak about it very soon. But you could see also here, in the end of the chart, that we have here the three last election systems that we've had really close one to the other. And you can see that in 2019, we had 11 and 10, it didn't change much. In 2020, we already had 14. I'm going to speak about it soon, just to show you in comparison how much other countries have, how much parties they have. So you can see here the different numbers. The United States has only 2, but most countries play with the numbers to about 10. That's why when Israel reached, and their parliaments are normally way bigger, and they normally have 2 houses. For example, in Britain, they have 10 parties, but they have 2 houses and with a lot more people. So just to show you that Israel is a very special case. More characteristics about the Israeli elections. First of all, you should know the Israeli elections are national. The whole country serves as one unit. There are no districts like you have in Denmark. It's proportional representation, meaning out of the turnover, out of the number of ballots that were cast, you take a fraction. Let's say 1 million people voted. So out of those 1 million votes, I'm dividing it by 120, and the number I get is 1 mandate in parliament. That's how it works. Secret ballot, of course, nobody should know what you cast. It's general suffrage and equal balance to each vote. I think we understand the rest. And here I brought you the situation also just to show you the voter turnout in Israel. And I think it also gives a bright picture of how Israelis have voted throughout time. And I think what it shows you quite clearly is that Israelis are very, very dedicated into voting in Israel, because the turnover is very high since the beginning. Maybe also Jews and other citizens, of course, learn to vote, learn to appreciate the fact that they have a vote, something that we didn't have for a very long time in other countries. And you can see that it has been quite steady. And there was a crisis starting in the 90s. You see it here. You see it's quite steady until 1999. We have 78.7. Then there was a drop and it keeps going up. So the next graph just shows you, it focuses on from 1999 to this very day, to 2020. And you can see how it dropped, and then it went up again. And today, in the last elections that we just had in March 2020, a year ago, we had a turnover of 71.1. You should take into consideration that 10% of registered Israeli citizens live abroad. So in actuality, you should count, and they cannot vote. We don't have absentee voting in Israel. You have to be in Israel to vote. So in actuality, it's not 71. It's way more out of the general population. You should see it as 80%. That's quite a high figure. And it shows you that Israelis are very involved in the state. They care about what happens there. They might complain about it, but they care about it and they want to change it. And they go to the ballot again and again and again. And you can even see, and that's very important. Sorry, someone just waiting in the waiting room. Okay, maybe I'll take just a moment to stop for a second and just ask if anyone has questions till now. Anything that was unclear? No, we are all clear. Okay. No, okay. Okay, so let's keep going. So I'm just going to this last slide, and just to show you that even though we had 3 election systems, you can see it in the last 3 figures. In April 19, September 19, and 2020 March, the turnover hasn't been affected that dramatically. You would expect that with each time that you are called to vote, 4 or 5 months after you just voted, your confidence will be shattered. You would say, oh, leave those politicians to fight between themselves. I don't care about this anymore. If they can't get along, I'm not coming to vote. They would show fatigue and despair. But you can see it's quite steady. And it's even going up. So from one election system to the other, it actually has gone up. So people have actually been more engaged in the system, which is amazing. Here I just brought you a few examples of the turnover of what's the percentage of people voting in other countries of the world. So you can see in Germany we have 71, in Britain it's just 66. In India, the biggest democracy in the world, it's 67. In the United States, it's just about half of the population. And in Japan, it's 52. And again, Israel, it's 71, but we should count as 80 because of the factor I just gave you. So it's just to show you how high the figure actually is. And I also brought you here another graph just to show you Israel 71 and Denmark is 85 almost, which is quite impressive as well. Okay, now another thing that we have to take into consideration is the electoral threshold. And if you remember, I told you that first there was the first crisis in the 90s where they changed the voting system into a personal voting system when you vote also for the prime minister, not only for the party, and then they canceled it. So that solution didn't work. It didn't work in stabilizing the system. It did bring the number of parties to a lower number, but it didn't really bring stability. So they tried a new thing almost a decade ago, and they decided to play with what we call the electoral threshold. And I will just explain it very quickly. Which is in Hebrew, it's the אחוז החסימה. It's the number of percentage of votes that you need to get, a minimum barrier you have to be above of to go into parliament. And you can see here in different countries, for example, here, the big country in Brazil, the big country in orange, which is Brazil, you can see that it's about 1%. So if you got 1% of the whole votes, you can go in with your party. In Israel, at the beginning, it also stood on 1%. But a few years ago, they have risen it to 3.25%. And that was done in hope that all the small parties of 1, 2, or 3 Knesset members will not be able to go in the Knesset, because 3.25 is more or less 4, you need to get 4 mandates to go in. And by that, they wanted to create a system where you have less small parties, and also to create some sort of an effect that those small parties that are dwindling in and out will not run, or maybe that they would unify with the closest party to them ideologically, and together they would run, and this would create more stability because we would have less parties. As you can see, it didn't work, and because that's one of the reasons, by the way, we're facing the crisis or these endless election systems, and I'll show to you in a second how exactly it worked. Now, one more thing I have to put in the picture before we actually dive into the current politics is how a government is formed. So after we get the results, the president of the state of Israel, currently Rubi Rivlin, he consults with all faction leaders in the Knesset, with all the heads of the parties in the Knesset. They come each one by one, and they, in private consultation with the president, tell him which party they would like, which prime minister they would like to see. Then the president, after he see all the calculations and he see which Knesset member has the most probable chances of forming a coalition government of 61, he requests that person, that Knesset member, to try and compose a government, and he gives him for that 28 days. Now, if he's unsuccessful, the president can give him a further extension of 14 days more. Now, in that time, of course, that candidate tries to form a coalition, and that's exactly where we would have all the negotiations. It's not like in Denmark, because in Denmark you don't have to have the parties inside the government. In Israel, they have to be inside the government, and every government comes with their different ideas and platforms, like we know from all of the parties in the world. And should the candidate be successful, then he notifies the president and the Knesset speaker, and we have a government, and it's all good. And Shalom al Israel, as we say in Hebrew. In case of a failure, then if the candidate is unable to form a coalition, for example, just like we saw in the 2 first election systems, when none of the blocks, and we haven't touched the blocks, but we will in a second, none of the blocks, right or left, had 61, and none of their candidates leading them could have formed a 61 coalition, they both flunked, and they gave back the mandate to the president in that case. And then what the president could do, let's say he asked Netanyahu couldn't form a right-wing party, he gave back the mandate to the president. Then the president called Benny Gantz back then, which was the head of the left-wing party bloc, and then Gantz tried to form a coalition, and he also failed. And in the case that those fail, we go to new elections, and that's where we are stuck right now. We are in this endless loop, and now it has happened for the 4th time that nobody has managed to form a coalition. Now, why is it so complicated? And one of the reasons why it is that complicated is the political dividers, or what we call Chameshet HaShesaim, the 5 schisms, that divide Israeli society. When I came to Denmark, I was trying to understand Danish politics. For example, I didn't understand why you call the right-wing party Venstre, but Venstre in Danish is left. But these were small things, and the things that and I don't mean to condescend, but the things that are in argument in Denmark are very, very narrow if you compare it to the Israeli system. I think that Danes as a whole are quite homogeneous people, and they agree on many things. You even see it now, how the government take decisions when they want to impose sanctions of lockdown, for example. So the prime minister would convene all the factions of parliament, and she would consult with Pernille Vermund all the way to Pernille Skipper back then. And then she would hear what they all have to say. Normally, most of them or all of them would vote with the government on such things. In Israel, that would never happen. Never. You always have opposition. The government goes with its coalition. We don't have the divide because here in Denmark, there's also a strife with its security and foreign relations. And even though it's a left-wing party, they would want Venstre, the conservative, to also vote with it. Not in Israel. And one of the reasons for that is that we are very different. First of all, within Jewish society, which comprises around 80% of the population, we have Jews coming from more than 60 different countries. That already brings a lot of dividers into the picture. Second, they're Jews, and you know, they say 2 Jews, 5 opinions. And then also don't forget that we have a 20% minority of Arabs or Druze that most of them are not even Zionists. So they don't really support the Jewish identity of Israel. So that's another divide. And you can see here the different divides. Like in Denmark, we have the normal divide between right and left economically. Left would be Avoda and Meretz. Right would be Likud and some other parties. But we also have a political divide between hawks, people that would, for example, oppose the establishment of a two-state solution and would want to have a strong hand with security threats and the likes. And then you have the doves from the left. You have the religious divider, you have the secular people, you have the traditional people in between, you have the national modern religious people, and then you have the ultra-Orthodox. And each one of them has a completely different vision for the state of Israel. We also have an ethnic divider, which some would say is fading more and more with time, between Ashkenazim, Jews coming mainly from Europe, and Sfaradim, Jews coming from Muslim states. And the one I've already mentioned is the national schism, Jews versus Arabs. That creates a lot of balagan, a big mess. And there is a demonstration down here, I think, just to show you, to illustrate the situation. So in really broad terms, just to show you what are the concerns in the economic divider, Mapai, which is the former name of the Labour Party, its name is actually in Hebrew abbreviation, Mifleget Poalei Eretz Israel, or in English, Workers' Party of the Land of Israel. So it is a party established for the workers. So you can already imagine what is their political platform: workers' rights, etc., etc. But as you can see here, okay, and I don't want to delve into it because it would be too long. And you can see here also, just to show you, and we'll not go into all the names, don't worry, just how the political map has changed over the years. Just look over the names between the 50s and the 90s, and you can barely find one party that survived by its name. It's amazing. Just to show you how the changes in Israel. All the time we have big parties falling apart and then coming back together. Even the Likud, the meaning of the name Likud in Hebrew means the union. Because you can see here in the upper chart, under the word the 50s, and you can see here that we have the general Zionists on the far right, like the right hand of the chart, and then we have the progressives, and we have Cherut, and these 3 parties I just mentioned, which represent more the middle class, the bourgeois, the Likud is the union of these 3 parties. Okay, And then on the other side, you can see here that we have Maki, which is the Communist Party. Today it's called Meretz. And then we have Mapam and Mapai. And Mapam and Mapai in the 70s came together to what was called back then Hama'arach. And Ma'arach is also another Hebrew word for a union. And then it later on became Ha'avodah, the Labor Party, which changed to Israel Achat, to One Israel, which changed then to the Zionist camp, HaMachane HaTzioni, which changed back to what we call today Avodah. So it's very vibrant. So that's one way. Either the parties come together, change their name, and the evolution is crazy. It's very hard to follow. That's why I don't want to bore you with all these details. It doesn't really matter for now. And then we spoke about another divider, the political one, the hawks and the doves. And in grosso modo, just like in big terms, it deals with, it's a post-1967 question after the Six-Day War, after Israel liberated or conquered, depends from what side of the map you are, the Golan Heights, Yehuda v'Shomron, Judea and Samaria, the Gaza Strip, and also back then the Sinai Peninsula. And the question of what should we do with those extra territories? Should we hold them? Because let's say in a place like Judea and Samaria, that's where we became a nation. We're called Jews because we come from Judea. So we should definitely stay there. It's where our forefathers are buried, for example, in Hebron. Or should we use it as a card to make peace with our enemies? The way it was done in 78 by Begin, when he gave back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, and then we had peace with Egypt. And of course, there comes also the question of the Palestinian state and the status of Jerusalem into that. And up till not very long ago, it was more of a clash between the Likud, which was, of course, was the right, and the Labour Party. Today, that divider is irrelevant in Israel. And I think that many people in Denmark, people who follow a little bit Israeli politics, do not understand that. And it's very present when you read sometimes interpretations and commentaries by Danish commentators that still think in the same way. That I would say that characterizes more Israel of the 90s. Today, it's not the way, and you're going to see the political map of voting today. So you'll see how it's just irrelevant anymore. And then this is another divider, which is actually in this current election system is very, very hot and relevant. And that's of course religious versus secularity. As I mentioned in the beginning, the founders of the state were secular Zionists. In many ways, they wanted to leave that image of the Jew of the exile, who's dressed in black and has the payas, the long hair here, and has the tzitziot, and studies all day in the yeshiva, Torah, and he's, cramped and like his back is bent, and to produce this muscle Jew, which is like very good looking. He, of course, is not religious. He works the land. He grows his own fruits and vegetables, things that we were never allowed to do during the exile years. He plays sports. He's modern. He's just one more nation among the rest of the nations, and that divide still sits today between what I would say the secular Jews, and on the other side, it's not only religious Jews, because there's so many different colors, but I would say the traditional Jews. Many of them are Mizrahim, coming from Muslim states, and they have a certain party that they would vote to. Shas, we'll touch it later, from 84, and also the Likud in some ways. And then you have the modern Orthodox, or Zion, the religious national party, which are religious people that actually do serve in the state, in the army, that are Zionists. And then you have the ultra-Orthodox that are, it varies, but that can be not Zionists to anti-Zionists, and it's not the same. And of course, each of these groups support different, they have a different vision of what Israel as a Jewish state or as a state should be. Should we have an halacha state that the laws are inspired or are even legitimized by the Torah, by the Halacha, by the Jewish law, or not. And we still have open questions that haven't still, because of that approach I mentioned to you before, of the inclusive, the extreme multi-party system that believes in dialoguing and coming to a compromise, all the ways from the Zionist Congresses through Ben-Gurion, and I would say even up till this very day, we have some still unsolved issues that are still being asked again and again and again in every election system, and then this election system maybe more than the others. First question, for example, and who is the definition of who is a Jew? We just had a court ruling saying that Israel should acknowledge a giyur, a conversion of Jews, also coming from the Reformed and conservative denominations or Jewish currents. The court, the high court, after the government for 15 years intentionally avoided that question. And that created a big, big commotion in Israel. Many of the parties deal with that question. You have on the left, you would have the parties that say that's a great solution, it should stay that way. And then on the other side, you would see some of the parties, for example, there was one party who actually showed you Jews celebrating a bar mitzvah, like a bar mitzvah, but just for their dogs, because now it's all going to get reformed, etc., etc. But also concerns questions of what should be open on Shabbat. Should the malls be open on Shabbat? Should we have public transportation on Shabbat? We've spoken about the status of non-Orthodox movements, marriage and divorce, which is right now handled under the chief rabbinate, so you don't have a civil union in Israel. Abortions, in which Israel is actually very liberal at, respectively, I would say, LGBT rights, etc. And then you have the ethnical divider, which is more of a sociological and ideological division. It mainly concerns the place of the Sfardis, those Jews coming from Muslim countries, and their place in the national ethos, because for many years they were pushed back. Either they were brought when they made Aliyah, when they moved to Israel, they were brought to populate localities in the periphery of Israel, in the desert, far from the centers, and many of them still live them today. A thing which created or perpetuated, you would say, poverty and lack of education, etc., etc., but also the place of these Jews in the efforts of building the country, in the history books, in the culture scene, in all these places that these Jews feel that they are excluded from. And I think that if one today watches on Yom Ha'atzmaut, on the Day of Independence, we have like a national TV ceremony, you would see how the government in the, I would say, past decade has been putting a lot of efforts trying to mend that kind of a schism, more and more so. And the last one is, of course, the national divider between Jews and Arabs. Arabs were given the right to vote right from the beginning, but they had really small minority lists. The majority of them would vote to Mapai, which is the former name of the Labour Party. But then only in the 90s, we saw some Arab parties appearing on the scene. Only in the 90s, it's amazing to see. One of them is called Balad, which is it's an abbreviation in Hebrew for National Democratic Alliance, and they advocate for a bi-national state. So it's a secular, nationalistic movement. So they do advocate for Palestinian and Israeli in a way nationality, and they would like Israel to cancel all of its Jewish characteristics and just to be a bi-national state that in a way has no national characteristics, so both could feel it's their home without being excluded one from the other. It's considered, by the way, at least in the Zionist Jewish parties, to be very extreme, because in many ways it's anti-Zionist. It actually wants to cancel the character of Israel as a Jewish state. Then we have another party, which is going to appear later on, very important, called Ra'am, which is also Hebrew abbreviations for United Arab List. It's a Muslim religious party, unlike the former one. They are for equal rights, and it's important to understand that, and for religious values. So, for example, in the LGBT questions, and we saw it this year, Balad was supporting all the votings on LGBT rights. Ra'am did not. And then we have Hadash, which is the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality. It's kind of, in a way, it's one of the phases of the Communist Party, and it's a country which advocates a Jewish-Arab partnership in a communist way. And all these parties I've just mentioned, all these three parties, when they changed the threshold, they had to unite, because up till that point, they used to since the 90s when they appeared, they used to get 1 to 2, 3 tops mandates. The minute they passed they raised the threshold, and some people say that was actually the intention of raising the threshold by one of the parties, they had to unite. And just this year, for the first time since they united, they split. And one of the questions that split them was, it's amazing just to think about it, but it's the LGBT question. Ra'am demanded that the Arab United List would not support any LGBT-related themes in the Knesset. And now it's running on its own, and we'll go back to it very soon. But remember Ra'am, it's the religious party. It's very important. And we have other divisions that we saw over time, Olim versus senior citizens. We had once we had a party just on pensioner rights, so it was like the oldie party. And something which we see very common also in this current political election campaign are personal parties, meaning you have one strong figure that leads a party, and they have no primaries, so he chooses all the members of that list. And I think that today there are very few parties that are not personal parties. And when we'll name them right soon after, you'll see that. And also, just imagine how that affects the very nature of the political system. If there's only one person running the show, you can't really disagree with him. And if you do, you will be cast away. And we saw it. Here we have Yair Lapid, just one example. He cast away a few of the people who didn't really follow what he was leading. And they were pushed out. And we see it in other parties as well. I want to stop and ask, first of all, if you have any questions, because I spoke a lot.
So, have you changed the host, Davey?
No, I don't. No, I just stopped.
Okay.
I stopped sharing now.
Yeah, should we take a short pause in the 5 minutes and then return to questions?
Okay, so you want to take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, we take 5 minutes and then we return back.
So we'll be back in 8:05.
Ja, 8:05. Vi holder en kort pause nu og er tilbage 5 minutter over, så I har tid til at forberede spørgsmål.
Ja, men vi ved ikke, are you finished with your...
No, I'm not, but I just want to see if they have any questions, because I spoke quite a lot.
Okay, then we should take questions now. If you have some questions, hvis I har nogle spørgsmål, så skal I stille dem nu til David, inden han fortsætter. Vi springer pausen over. Og husk, I kan markere med en hånd. Under reaction, der kan I åbne den, og så er der en hånd, I kan trykke på. Så kan I markere, hvis I har spørgsmål til David. Og husk korte, præcise spørgsmål. Der er en markering, ja. Alex?
Oh, someone raised their hand, yeah. Alexander, I see.
Hello, Mr. Davy. My
Hello.
name is Alexander. I just have a question. We have some representative from the Israeli embassy last year in Aarhus,
Mhm.
It's some press secretary, Yano, I think his name was.
Yeah.
And we was talking about BDS. I asked him about BDS. And I want to ask you if Israel takes seriously BDS organization.
Okay.
My question is because Mr. Yano told us that BDS, it's not so important in, he make like there was not problem for Israel. So I want to ask you if it's, because for me, they are very, very serious problem for Israel, BDS.
Okay. Maybe he misunderstood the question, but I would say so. BDS is very important for the state of Israel. We actually have a ministry which deals just with that. So I think that's the best proof of all. And we are trying to monitor all the time. Also here in the embassy, any attempts to try and call for boycotting of Israel. We learned, for example, that just last week there was an attempt in the Copenhagen municipality to pass a BDS law in the Copenhagen municipality. It was smothered, but you can see these suggestions keep rising. So we actually take a lot of importance on actually monitoring and stifling these initiatives. What I would say, and maybe that's what David Yano said, that in Denmark, the situation of BDS is very bad, thank God. So they don't really manage to succeed in their initiatives. They don't become public. It's not like Denmark has embraced or passed any BDS laws. And it's considered, I would say, even illegitimate here. I mean, you can see sometimes campaigns calling to boycott Israeli wine stores. We had wine stores. We had it only recently, but it doesn't really catch up. I mean, it doesn't become very popular, and maybe that's what he meant. But just again, to answer your question, basically, of course, we take it very seriously, the attempts for BDS promotion, of course.
It's because he left the impression like BDS was not big problem for Israel. This is what the impression was.
So, I don't know, I wasn't there, but maybe he meant the Denmark situation is not so bad. Maybe that's what he meant.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Are there other who have questions due to the election in Israel? Er der andre, der har spørgsmål, så skal I endelig markere. Alex, husk at tage din hånd ned, ellers så tror vi, du har en markering igen. Og I kan gøre det ved at række hånden op under reactions. Ellers så skal Davy fortsætte. Davy, you can continue if there are not any more questions.
Okay, so we just...
I just want to say it's very, 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 very good lecture. It's
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to share screen once more. Okay. So we are, wait a minute, because this is going to freeze. So, yeah. So we spoke about many things. I want to reach now to this current situation. In many ways, this was all background, but I think very important background that we could not have understood what's going on today in Israel otherwise. Just to show you, again, this is schematic. You do not need to go into the details of every year. But what I do want to show you is one thing that we have still left that we have still didn't talk about, and that's the block division. And in this elections, especially the three ones that we've had, and also in this current one, the fourth one, the block division is of utmost importance for the creation of a 61-hand coalition. And you can see here the different colors. Now, you could see that, first of all, 1 second, this is very disturbing. Okay, yes. You could see that, first of all, in red, but the light red, not the deep red, the light red, sorry, it represents the center left. And you could see that from 49 all the way to 73, it was the biggest. It had, like, in those columns, it represents 100% of every year. The light red chunk is the biggest, right? Meaning they had the majority, and that's why they had the government. From 77, again, with the uproar, the criticism against Golda Meir's disputed victory, I would say, in the Yom Kippur War. There was a lot of criticism because there were many, many casualties, Israeli soldiers. And also there was the sense of the Sfaradim, those Jews from the Jewish country, from the Muslim countries, the felt of deprivation, of discrimination was getting stronger and stronger and stronger. That's what fueled, in many ways, the rise of the Likud and of the right bloc, which is here represented by the blue color. It's like in Denmark, you have the red and the blue. For you, it would be very natural. And you can see how it was growing from 69 gradually until in 77, it was bigger than the red one. And that's when they took the power for the first time. And another thing you could see is the green color, the light green, the yellow greenish color in the middle between the red and the blue, which represents the center parties. It's a new, rather new phenomenon, which, as you can see from the 2000s, have been more and more present in the Israeli sphere. But I think what is the most astounding, maybe in all this picture, if you go to the very end, 2015, you could see what happened to the red bloc. It's almost gone. I mean, in this round, and also in the previous one, people were eulogizing, saying, goodbye to the Labour Party, the party that used to lead the country, that in many ways founded the many institutions of the state of Israel, is gone. And that's what creates the bloc division. As you can see, it's not anymore about, it's not about any of these dividers, actually. Starting that cycle of those 4 election systems we're talking about. And here, and that's just one more thing, you can just see what was the election about from 49 all the way to 2009, where security is the blue. You can see how it keeps up and going. So you would have one election system about security, and then probably the next one, they wouldn't care so much for it. Like, it's because we kept having wars all the time. But the thing that's changed, I would say, maybe since 2004, so since the Gaza war, and I think also from the despair from the peace process. In the 90s, we had the Oslo Peace Accords. Israel allowed the Palestinian Authority to be formed. It gave territories to them. Afterwards, in 2005, we withdrew from Gaza, and I think in the eyes of the majority of Israelis, we got rockets. It showed that the chances for peace process are slim. And since we could manage the situation rather okay, I mean, we could have peace even without, going there and handing land or dividing Jerusalem or doing all those painful things that we were told we have to do in the 90s, and we're still doing quite well. It has faded. That importance of that question is not important anymore so much, because I think there was a shift first in that question of most of the people going to the right, because they say we've tried the peace track and it failed us in many ways. Second Intifada as well, I haven't mentioned, in 2001. And also, we managed the situation. I mean, we haven't had a big war in the past 7-8 years. We're doing okay. Israel, economically, is doing perfect. We've become a superpower on many terms. So that is not the question anymore. So what is the question? I'm jumping now. What is the question? And I think this picture gives you the answer of what is the picture. The picture, in many ways, is the question, the big divider in many ways today it's just the people that you see here on the screen. The public debate has become so contentless, meaning having no meat behind it, no actual content. We don't speak about values, whether it's, should we establish a Palestinian state or should we build more? It's there in the sides, but mainstream, that's not the talk. We don't talk about that. We don't. So it's not the security issue anymore, even though it was very dominant over time. It's not even Arabs versus non-Arabs, or we've mentioned religious, non-religious. The number one question, the big divider of the blocks today is not the 5 schisms, is one person, and that's how the camps and the blocks are called today. We have the Bibi camp and the non-Bibi camp. So you're either pro-Netanyahu, meaning you support him, you think he is a great prime minister, he has done wonders, he has brought us 4 peace accords with 4 Arab nations for the first time since Rabin, since the 90s. He is a master in dealing with Corona. Israel is leading with the vaccinations. Israel is an economic superpower, a high-tech startup nation. All these things since he's been in power since 2009, which he's the longest incumbent prime minister in history. He passed Ben-Gurion. 12 years it's 11 years as prime minister. So there isn't a question of what kind of mark did he leave, because so many years we've been living under his rule. Then if you support that, if that's your view of Netanyahu, then you are inside the Bibi camp. If you don't, if you think that, thank you, Netanyahu, you've done well, or you've done okay, depends who you're asking, of course, but it's time for you to go away. We need a change, we need new forces. You put your inputs, your focuses on specific questions. We now want to focus on other things, other questions that are not any less important than the thing that you accentuated over the years. Go home, we don't want you anymore. And also they add to that the charges that Netanyahu is suspected of, 3 charges of breaching trust and corruption. And then they say that the prime minister, under the suspicion of doing such crimes, should not stay in office. He should, first of all, and because first, it's a question of ethics. Should the prime minister who is facing such trials and is not clean still be in the position? And second, does he have time to run a state while he also needs to defend his good name in court? They say, take a break, solve your issues at court, and then if you're clear, you can come back. And also, of course, it does sit on some sort of a political division. It's clear to us all, it's quite natural, that the forces more or less supporting Netanyahu are coming from the right. And the forces opposing Netanyahu are coming from the left. But the very interesting thing is that the clear cut that we used to have doesn't exist. It's not so clear anymore. I want to take you to the British Parliament for a moment. I don't know if you've ever been there, but the way that the British Parliament, the House of Lords is constructed is that you have, it's not like the Danish Parliament. You have one room and there are benches on one side and there are benches on the on the opposite side. They don't meet. There's a space in between them, and the opposition sits on one side and the coalition sits on the other side, and it's very clear who belongs where, because you're sitting right opposite to each other. In the Israeli system, just like in the Danish system, we do not sit like that in the parliament. We sit in a half crescent forming of sitting, and the coalitions are composed with different factions. So you don't really always know which party would go in the coalition and which wouldn't. The lines are not very clear. And I think that we've taken it into an extreme in these 4 elections that we've been having, because the line has completely faded. What do I mean? You can see here in the picture Bibi, or Bibi Benjamin Netanyahu, he is the head of the Likud. You see him right here on the top of the right side. The ultra-Orthodox go with Netanyahu, and they're right under him. We have Shas, which is the party representing the Sephardi, the Jews coming from Muslim states, mostly traditional or ultra-Orthodox. Zionists, I would say, serve in the army and also have conservative values, but not very extreme ones. But no women serve in that party. And with them also goes another, I would say, ultra-Orthodox party, non-Zionists, but not anti-Zionists. Most of it is just non-Zionists. They do not serve in the army. I would say half of the men there also don't go to work. They study at the yeshivas to study the Torah. And they represent the Ashkenazi faction of that sector. Both together go with Netanyahu. Because traditionally, since Netanyahu has been in power, since 2009, most of the time, they've always been with him. And Netanyahu, in many ways, knows how to meet the needs of their sectors and their demands. So they are with him. And under them, you see another party that also belongs to the Bibi camp, which is the National Religious Party, representing, I would say, the staunch, hardliner, right-wing religious people, modern religious people that do serve in the army, that are Zionists, that do go to work, all of them. Some of them, I would say the majority of them, are also living beyond the Green Line in the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, and they are led by Smotrich. These four groups, Likud, Shas, the United Torah Judaism, they're called, the Ashkenazi group, and the National Religious Party, are all part of one bloc called the Bibi camp, which also, by the way, all of them belong to the same right. In the past, they would also belong, all of them, to the right bloc. On the other side, we see Yesh Atid on the right, far left part, above, with Yair Lapid. And Yair Lapid is the head of the other camp, of the not Bibi camp. Yesh Atid is a centrist party, so it's center, maybe leaning center-left, but representing a more secular, I would say, people living mainly in the big cities, Tel Aviv, for example, and all the cities around it. They believe in promoting a secular vision to the state of Israel, acknowledging, for example, the rights of other non-Orthodox movements of Judaism, LGBT rights, opening businesses on Shabbat. Their approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not very far left, but it is for a two-state solution, but Jerusalem should be unified, etc., etc. And Yesh Atid is the biggest party in that bloc. And Yair Lapid, that's how Netanyahu is trying to portray it, is the one going head-to-head with Netanyahu. So it's Bibi on the one hand and Yair Lapid on the other side. But then look who are the people around Yair Lapid. We have here another party called New Hope, led by Gideon Sa'ar. But Gideon Sa'ar does not belong at all to the left bloc. Gideon Sa'ar is a flesh of Likud. He's been there for years, and he's ran against Netanyahu endless times and lost each time. But he was marked as the one who would lead the Likud after Bibi. Now he broke out of Likud, established a new party, which is a right-wing party. In many ways, you can't even find differences between Likud and New Hope. No differences. They would both support a mixed liberal, economically speaking, system, this very delicate balance between religion and state, leaning more to a Jewish identity and conservative, but not extreme, not religious, something traditional in the middle. They would, of course, think that there should be no problem building in Judea and Samaria, etc., etc. So you could not recognize any differences between the two, save the part that Gideon Sa'ar said explicitly that in every coalition that would be established, he will never go with Netanyahu. That's what puts him in that block. Same goes with the guy under Yesh Atid, Lapid. You see him, Avigdor Lieberman, who leads the party of Israel Beitenu, meaning Israel is our home, which represents the voice of many Russian Jews. In the 90s, over 1 million Russian Jews made Aliyah, moved to Israel. Many of them vote to Lieberman. Also Lieberman, by the way, came from the former Soviet Union. Many of them vote to him, and they are characterized also as a right-wing party, a hard line against the Palestinians. But the difference is that maybe unlike Likud and New Hope, and that I told you, believe in this delicate balance between religion and state, and they lean more to the Jewish identity conservative approach, Israel Beitenu and its Russian voters are for a very civil agenda, very similar to the one Yesh Atid of Lapid promotes. Because so they would be for establishing civil unions in Israel and not only being able to get married only in the rabbinate, for example, and many other opening business on Shabbat, because many of them are not religious. So they would be hawkish but secular voters. Normally also Lieberman, for I don't know how many governments of Netanyahu, he would sit with Netanyahu in every party and they would cooperate. And Lieberman used to be the best friend of Shas and the United Torah Judaism. Today, in many ways, I think Lieberman is the generator of all the rupture that we see in the political system, the instability, because Lieberman, for the first time, in the first elections that started this cycle, said, I'm no longer willing to sit with the ultra-Orthodox. I want civil unions now. I want to open businesses on Shabbat now, etc., etc. So he broke off the ultra-Orthodox, put a big X on Netanyahu, calling him corrupt over the charges that he's facing at court, and placed himself also in the not Bibi camp, together with Sa'ar and Lapid. And then you have under them the natural candidates that belong to the natural, organic left-wing bloc, the Labour Party, the only party led by a woman today, by Merav Michaeli, which naturally opposed the Likud because they used to be political opponents. Today it's shrunk, it's a very small party. You have here Meretz, which is even a more far-right party, more far left. So you have Labour, and to its left you would find Meretz, maybe Enhed Listen in Danish terms. And you have Blue and White, which in many ways is just, some would say, is a copy of Labour. Same party, just headed by a different person, which was the chief head of staff of the Israeli army. They all belong to the left bloc, and of course they oppose Netanyahu. Now, the intriguing part, besides what I just showed you, that New Hope and Israel Beitenu are naturally part of the right bloc that moved to the anti-Bibi bloc, we have another very interesting phenomenon. The parties that are benchmarked, that are right here in the middle. You see here Yamina, and you see here Ra'am. Now, Yamina is also a religious national party. It's led by Naftali Bennett. He has a kippah, so he's a religious but modern one. He serves in the army. He has had, I think, 3 exits, so he's like very well immersed in the high-tech scene, made a lot of money out of the successes, the exits that he's done. Hardliner, hawkish, and he doesn't say where he belongs to. So if up till now it was very clear that if you voted for Bennett, for Yamina, you were voting for the right bloc, now Bennett says, I'm not playing this game. I'm for Bibi, I'm anti-Bibi game. I would sit with both, depends what will be the terms on the ground. If with the Likud and the ultra-Orthodox and the national religious and myself, we will have 61, I will join in to Bibi and to that bloc. But if with New Hope of Sa'ar, Yesh Atid of Lapid, is Israel Beiteinu of the Russians, of Lieberman, we will have a majority, 61, I will join them. It doesn't matter. I'm not excluding anyone, he says. And that same game is played by this fella under him, the head of Ra'am, which is Mansour Abbas. I'm reminding you, an Arab party which split from the joint list, which is right under the Gideon Sa'ar's party. Joint list in Israeli terms is considered to be far left, so it's even after Meretz. Again, those parties, I'm reminding you, the Democratic Alliance and the other party that are for the other party being the Communist Party, or what was left of it, preaching for a two-state, a binational state, abolishing the Jewish character of the state of Israel, etc., etc., etc. Ra'am split from the joint list, I told you, over two very cardinal points for him. One was the LGBT question, which the joint list could not have agreed to, because their game is, if we support equality and liberty, we should support it for everyone. And his second point was, I am not willing to pledge that I will not be a part of Bibi Netanyahu's party, because the joint list said we will never support Netanyahu. We belong to the anti-Bibi camp. There was actually a big question in the last election campaign, whether it was legitimate that the anti-Bibi camp would recruit support basing on support from the joint list, on the Arabs. In the Israeli political system, you never cooperate, you never construct your coalition on the joint list's voices, because they are anti-Zionist. So they are considered illegitimate in forming a coalition. For the first time in the previous elections, there was a question, because again, this 61 is such a magical number, that there was a discussion whether it was legitimate for the left bloc, the anti-Bibi bloc, to rely on the joint list. Out of that discussion, Mansour Abbas said, I am not willing to play that game. Who said that the joint list should recommend only the anti-Bibi camp? Why can't Ra'am, my party, also go with Netanyahu? And then we'll get what we want. He wanted to fight crimes in Arab localities, constructing more police stations. He wanted more budgets for education for Arabs, and other civil reforms. I can get that. He said, why do I have to go with the left like we always went with? I can play both games. If at the end of the day, if I'll get what I want, which is rights, money, budgets for my community, I don't care who is heading the state. And with that, with Bennett, who comes in many ways from the very far end of the political spectrum, they sit together on the same rubrica of people that are the balance between the two blocks. And what will happen is a great mystery. Adding to this complexity, and that's the one last component I'm adding, because I know it might be very complicated to grasp all of it, is in here I'm not only focusing on the block division question, I'm also now going back to the threshold question. Threshold, as I remind you, is 3.25%. All the parties that are marked blue or turquoise pass for sure the threshold. So Likud and the old roadblocks are in. Bennett's party, Yamina, is in. New Hope of Sa'ar, Yesh Atid of Lapid, the Russian party of Lieberman, and the joint Arab list are all in for sure. They get more than 4. But the parties in orange, and look how many we have here, might not pass the threshold. So the Labour Party, as I've already mentioned, the historical, magnificent party that was in power for so many years and had a lot of merits, might disappear these elections. Meretz, which is also a very old party, might also not pass. Same goes with blue and white, which is, I don't know how much you followed, but Gantz, in the former constellation that we've had, Gantz formed a coalition with the Likud, with Netanyahu, and they were both prime ministers. That was they had a deal. Netanyahu would be a prime minister first, and after 2 years, Gantz would replace him. We've never completed the 2 years, so government dissolved, and that's why we're going back to elections. So from Gantz, from leading the second largest party, that's what we had last time, he might not now pass the threshold. It's amazing, just to show you how much it is so flexible that the support parties might get or not get, and how much the personal component, ingredient is so important. And I promise to point out which parties rely on the personal ingredient, are just led by one persona. Yesh Atid, Lapid, is like that. He's taking all the decision and he appoints the members of his party. There's no voting. Same goes for Sa'ar, same goes for Israel Beitenu. Same goes for Yamina of Bennett. So 5 big parties have no primaries. The ultra-Orthodox, the same. And all those very small party, Gantz's party as well, is also a personal component. So he makes up he decides the makeup of the party. So you can see how many parties actually have an internal democratic process. Also, it affects a lot the way the political system behaves, because just imagine how much ego is involved besides survival questions. Now, so the Labor and Meretz and also Gantz's blue and white are dwindling. No one knows if they will pass the threshold or not. Ram, no one knows if it's split from the Arab Voice. No one knows if they will pass or not. If they will not pass, it means that the representation of Arabs is going to diminish substantially. From 15, they might drop to 9 if Ram doesn't pass. It's quite substantial. So it's a big guess for him. It took quite a chance here, and we'll see if it was worth it. And also Smotrich from the National Religious, it's not very sure if he's going to pass the threshold. Now, what does this all mean? Most of these parties, as you see, the dwindling parties, the unsafe parties are the ones belonging to the left, the anti-Bibi bloc. Should 1 or 2 not pass, it will fortify Netanyahu's party, because when one party doesn't pass, I'm reminding you, we have a proportional system, meaning if 1 million people voted, we divide to 120, and that number that we get represents 1 mandate out of the 120. If 1 million citizens vote, and then Labour Party did not pass the threshold, it means that we don't divide 1 million by 120. We will now divide 900,000 by 120, meaning the parties that are making it in, get more vote. I hope it makes sense. And that's why that question of the threshold might change the whole, the way we see the division of the votings. And maybe this time we might have a decisive outcome and not again come to the impasse of not being able to form a 61 coalition on both sides and then going to a 5th election. Some commentators say that is the decisive factor, the threshold. Should one of those, even 1 or 2 of those small left-wing parties will not pass, it might magnify the power of all the other parties. And first and foremost, the power of the Likud being the biggest party in all of parliament, in all consecutive polls of the few last months. And believe me, they post a poll every day in Israel. It's crazy. Okay, we won't have time to go over the differences between all the parties, even though I think we've mentioned them now orally. This is just to sum up the blocks in the way they have in the one, and that's really to sum up everything, because we've reached the end. Just to sum up all the changes that our system has gone throughout the past decade. So if you go back to 2009, here they flip the colors, so bear with me. The red color represents the right. and you can see that they had the majority. And with the ultra-Orthodox, which is black, we get how much? We get exactly 61. So we had a right-wing coalition supported by the Likud, the modern Orthodox, the national religious people, and the ultra-Orthodox. That was a classical, and Lieberman as well. It was a classical right-wing party for a long time. Wait a minute, I see somebody is, never mind. Trying to go in, but I can't let him in now. And then you can see how the blue, which is the left center block, is too small. So 2009, 2013, 2015, they didn't have enough to pass the 61. When did things change? When, for the first time in September 2019, Lieberman, and that's the yellow part that says 8, decided that he is breaking out of the right, what is here, red block. He is a non-Netanyahu, he's right, but he is a non-Netanyahu party. That shifted everything, because the minute he did that, how much is 39 plus 16? Not enough for you to have a government. So a few months passed by, and again, we had the same situation. And now what is, I think, is most exciting, I would say, and unpredictable. Look what happens here in the last column. From 6 to 7, which was only Lieberman stating, holding right-wing voters in his hand, but saying, I will not sit with Netanyahu. And that way he actually created a situation where the right bloc could not form a government, because it was always 61, 65. So the minute Lieberman takes his 8 or 7 votes, the whole system is stopped, is stuck. But in this election system, it's not anymore just Lieberman. You see that it grew. That when Gideon Sahar from the New Hope, the guy that broke out of Likud, established his party, he managed to even reduce the power of the red bloc of the right, which is basically the Likud, even further. So that yellow bloc, the non-Netanyahu right-wing bloc, has increased to 19. And then we have the 12 more, which is also a new phenomenon of Bennett, that guy I told you from the modern Orthodox one who said, I will sit with Netanyahu if he will have a coalition, and I will sit with the left if they will have a coalition. He's also joined the game. So he's not anymore swearing allegiance to Netanyahu naturally. And that's what creates this instability. In one line, right-wing parties that no longer want to have a coalition with the right-wing leader currently, which is Netanyahu, who is Netanyahu. And that's the source maybe of the entire mess that we see here. And it will be very interesting after the 23rd of March, when we'll have the elections, just to see exactly what will be the outcome. Politics will play its game. Maybe some of those leaders who say that they will never sit with Netanyahu will change their mind. Maybe they won't, and then we'll go to fifth election. God knows. But I think that maybe now, I hope, after my explanation, you better understand why we have reached where we have reached, and why is Israel going to fourth election. And that's just one last thing to show you what are the post-election scenarios after the 23rd of March. The first scenario is that Netanyahu will manage to establish a government with the ultra-Orthodox, it's not his natural partners, and Bennett, the one that we said that plays both games. God knows. If they'll have a 61 together, it will be enough. And that's why the polls are very close. One day that bloc has 60, the next day they have 61, 2 days afterwards they have 59. It's nerve-wracking, but it's a matter of between 2 to 3 mandates, and that's why it's very important if just one party from the left doesn't pass, because it would mean the other parties would grow. Second option, we would have a broad coalition without Netanyahu. So you will see all those guys I showed you at the side, Lapid, Saar, Lieberman, and possibly Bennett sitting together, even though it's right and left, all mixed up, but the common denominator is not wanting Netanyahu, or none of the sides would have 61, and we're going to 50 elections. They already have a date for September. So that's that. I hope it was it managed to clarify a little bit situation. If you have any other questions, I would be more than willing to answer.
Så har I mulighed nu her for afslutningsvis lige at stille et kort spørgsmål, og husk at raise your hand if you have any questions.
Alexander
Yeah.
og Iris.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really great job you're doing, Devi. I really appreciate that you explained this to us. And I have a question regarding the discussions about how to change the system that Israel want result in a fifth election. Well, what was the argument, or how can you do it differently that it won't happen again?
I think it's a very intelligent question, but I think that given the current situation, if we can't agree, if our parliamentarians can't agree on the government, do you think that they would agree on changing the system?
Mm-hmm.
That would affect their chances of getting in? No, nobody will play with it now. And to be honest, I don't think that such broad constitutional changes of playing with the threshold or any other change to the system should be done on the spur of the vote. You need a broad coalition for such changes. There is a consensus in the Israeli system that when you change the system, for example, there had been talks that prime minister cannot do more than 2 consecutive administrations, like Netanyahu, who's now running for the 5th time, if I'm not mistaken. Even if they will pass such law, it will not be effective from now. It will be effective just from the next the next election system, because we don't want to have a situation where you pass a law which actually affects you. There's something unfair. It's like it's like the parliamentarians would vote for a raise in their salary starting today. No, that's the logic. I don't see any. So, in short, I don't see any change to the system. I would have wished to. I think that many people are just sick of voting again and again and again, having this instability, not having the state's budget being passed like we saw last year, government not being to promote anything, especially in such times, hard times like Corona. But I think if we will not have a decisive outcome or a coalition of some sort, then we will get to a fifth election. There's no way out of it otherwise, I think.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Okay, Iris, husk at tage din hånd ned, eller
Ja, det
så.
kan jeg ikke finde ud af. Hvordan går man det?
Bare tryk på knappen igen, eller på hånden, så forsvinder den.
Ja. Okay, yes.
Ja, Alexander, du har et spørgsmål.
Mr. Davy, I have heard about the 8 years presidential limit. So, but now I have another question. In Israel, you have still many laws from the British mandate occupying Palestine, and many laws from that time. It's possible when the government in September will not reach agreement, it's possible the military will take over?
Oh, no, no, completely no. We are not Myanmar. That's completely out of the game. The army is completely under the control of the security minister, and it has no aspirations. It doesn't play such a role in the state of Israel whatsoever.
No, I think it's my question is not dictatorship. It's not like
no,
this.
no. But the army
My
doesn't.
question
I
is-
understand your question. The arm, and I am answering. the army does not intervene whatsoever in the political system. It would be
What about the
considered
president?
completely out of line by the citizens of Israel.
What about the president? Can he govern the state of Israel?
No, he has a few maneuvers. You know, he can decide on which candidate he can cast the mission of trying to assemble a coalition. So he might say, okay, I'm not giving it first to Netanyahu, but once we'll have the elections now, I'm giving it to Lapid first. That's within the maneuvering spectrum that he has, but he can't really take it. He can't. It's a fragment. It's a multi-party system. You need a coalition. It's not the military. It's not the president. You need 61 hands. The president
What
holds
about
no
the High
power.
Court? The High Court.
Same.
No?
High Court is already being very criticized for the role. Its active approach. It's already been taken. You know what? I'll show you just. It's a good question. So I'll just show you one last thing, because I had here one. That's that one. There is a graph here. Can you see it?
Yes.
And it shows you the trust of Israelis in public institutions in Israel. And of course, and that's why that also goes to your first question, Tzahal, the IDF, Israeli army, enjoys a very high support by the public. Even though it's diminished a little bit, you can see it's around 80%. And that's out of the very basic fact that almost everyone has a son, a daughter, a brother, or a sister in the army. So the army is like the people's army. I've been there, we've all been there. It's non-political, it doesn't play any political part, and that's why it enjoys a very high trust from the people. The presidency of Israel, which is equivalent in some ways to maybe the Queen of Denmark, also used to enjoy such high trust. And you can see that it has been crumbling very much, almost a drop of 20%. I think the reason for that is that it's because that the president has taken some political stands lately that angered some people from, I would say, the right bloc, even though he comes from the Likud. And that's why the trust in that institution has dropped over the years.
He chose this side.
Sorry? No, he's not
thinking he chose a little bit more to the right and to the.
No, but the criticism that he gets is for sometimes siding with the left, actually, or saying things that are critical or political. And he shouldn't be political. It's just like the Queen of Denmark would tomorrow go out and say that she thinks that we should all support the climate law or something like that. It's not her place. It's the same perception we have in Israel towards the president. And when he does, people don't identify as much with that public institution. I think that's what that graph shows. And then I'm getting to the Supreme Court. You've asked about it. And you can also see, first of all, it never enjoyed a very high trust levels, but you can see how much it is plummeted to 42%. And it's quite kind of equivalent to what happens with our president. Some people in the Israeli society feel that the court is taking an active approach and sometimes siding with one political camp over the other. And when such institutions give a perception to the public that they are politicized, the public trust in them drops. Probably from that camp that feels that these institutions are acting against, but it doesn't matter. So that's what I'm telling you. There are those tendencies, let's call them, by the president maybe and by the Supreme Court to be more political than what is expected. But we're not talking in any way of them taking over the country or leading a solution. It will not come from them. And by the way, you can see, the government also has been heavily affected by all these endless repetitions of election systems. It stands on 25% of public trust. Knesset, our parliament, 21.5%. The parties, 14. I think these are the expressions of this current.
No trust for the parties.
Yes, because they all believe that they lie and they act by their own interests and egos. I'm not saying that's the situation, but that's the image that they might have by the public.
Thank you.
Of course.
Puls, er du på?
Yes. Okay, yes. Hi, David.
Hi.
Just a small question about, let's say, the daily political life in Israel. I know the election right now makes everything very complicated. The daily political life in Israel, is it just as brutal as in America, where the two parties are not really able to work together, or are they really able to work together?
I don't think it's as brutal as it is in America. Thank God, I would say that. There is sometimes a feeling that all these things that happen in America reach Israel at the end of the day. And I think it's true in this case as well. I think that just like you saw with Trump, for example, but not that I'm comparing Netanyahu to Trump, because that would be completely unfair to Netanyahu, of course. Because I think it's way more responsible. But the whole personal targeting of leaders is something that I think is influenced by America. You know, you saw it in the last elections. Sleepy Joe, you know, making fun of his age, of his stammering or what have you, on the one hand, and then you have the molesting Trump. I don't want to repeat some of the phrases that he mentioned of the places he should grab. You know, it's been very personalized. Not so much a political debate as to values and perceptions. We feel that a little bit in the political sphere, but I don't think it's as brutal. It's brutal in the sense of this division of for Bibi or against Bibi. That is brutal, because I can tell you personally as a citizen, you could vote to whichever party you want, but at the end of the day, you expect the grown-ups, the politicians, you expect them to sit together and solve it and get to an agreement on the things that we could agree and lead their country. And that we don't get. So in some ways, that is kind of brutal in the sense that people are already fed up with it, because it feels like it's, you know, like we have like an endless cycle of rules. Like if you turn to the right, you'll get this, and if you get to the left, you'll get this, and no one is able to exercise some extra thinking and be flexible. And when he does, he is being, if we're talking about brutal, take a look at what happened to Benny Gantz, for example. In the last elections that we've held, none of the sides managed to get 61. But Benny Gantz, out of what he felt was his responsibility as a leader, decided to join Netanyahu to a parity government, even though he said he wouldn't, because he said it was a hard time. We are facing a world crisis. We are facing Corona. This is time for unity, he said. And even though he brought only 20 seats and Netanyahu had 50 seats, they decided they're going to split the government into two. So Gantz had half of the ministers and Netanyahu had half of the ministers. And even so, the public punished him. And today he's barely passing the threshold. So in that sense, it is brutal that when someone doesn't play by these rules of yes, Bibi or nay, Bibi, then he gets slammed. I don't know if it answers your question, but that's the brutality I see in the way this game is structured right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Godt. Ellen, du har også et spørgsmål. Troels, kan du tage hånden ned?
Yep.
Yeah, I just wonder if I got you right, understood you right, when you're saying that the main issue in this election and also the ones before is whether you are with Bibi or against Bibi. Is that rightly understood? So
Yes,
you do
when they
So
show
that-
you polls, when they show you polls, unlike the past, that they would show you the division between the blocks, as I showed you, right, left, or whatever. It's for Bibi against Bibi. That's the block. That's how the cake is divided. I should have shown you that. Just that's how the
So-
polls are constructed.
So the candidates that do not talk about social security or security at all, and
They do, but it's not. You should watch the TV interviews. The minute that they do, the anchors are taking it straight back to. So will you sit with Netanyahu or not?
okay,
You know, yeah,
what a power is! Whoa, thank you.
of course.
I think it's very sad.
Me too.
Er der andre, der har spørgsmål, så skal I markere nu her, inden vi slutter. If there are other who have questions, it's now they should approach the scene. Okay.